G'day viewers, it's Adam here. I've got James Hughes, who's the Executive Director of IEET, that's the Institute for Ethics and Emerging Technologies. James, would you like to quickly introduce yourself?
Well, I'm a sociologist and bioethicist, and I teach and work at Trinity College in Hartford, Connecticut, and started the IEET with Nick Bostrom, an Oxford philosopher, about 8 years ago. And longevity is one of our central missions, one of our programmatic foci.
Well, it seems as though this Google versus death phenomenon has got quite a bit of attention. And so the new company that Google's creating, Calico, seems to be quite interesting, and based on Larry Page's announcement, it looks like they're trying to focus on long-term achievements. I wonder if they're focusing on fundamental research. What are your thoughts?
I think that from what they've said, that they want to go directly to the causes of aging, so it seems very much influenced by the SENS logic, that there are fundamental mechanisms of aging, and hopefully they will be investigating those. I think SENS, there's a broader field of biogerontology than just SENS, so there's also investigations into the genes behind supercentenarians and so forth, other avenues of research that they'll probably be open to as well. But the more the merrier in this field. I mean, it's going to take as many possible avenues as we can explore.
Yeah, I'm hoping that they do focus on the long-term fundamental research strategies, instead of just getting sidetracked and having a completely sidetracked and having it like a short-term technological spin-off, which is, I guess, easier to achieve perhaps, and that often happens when there's lots of money involved.
Well, that's what's so interesting about this, is that they clearly were not targeting, Alzheimer's disease or heart disease or cancer as, immediate goals. They were targeting the mechanisms of aging. So it is a longer term and much riskier investment. But when you have the kind of cash that the Google folks have, you can engage in that kind of research, and that seems to be very much the direction that they've been going with the new Google X campus and some of the other research projects that they've been engaging in.
Right, Google X campus is something maybe I haven't really read about yet. Do you want to describe what that is?
Well, it's pretty much a mystery because they've been keeping the projects there under wraps, but Google has built a new campus to engage in speculative R&D for the Google endeavor in general. So they seem to be putting their resources into not just immediate short-term profit making, but long-term scientific research, and that's wonderful.
Yeah, it is. It is interesting. Do you think would you describe it as a sort of a skunk works thing?
That's certainly the way they've sold it. It's very much under wraps what they're working on there.
I wonder if that'll be the case for the anti-aging research.
Well, if you want to monetize what you're doing, and eventually, then there has to be a certain level of corporate secrecy. So I don't expect that they'll be very much different in that, unlike some of the more open source initiatives like George Church's supercentenarian research. But that can yield benefits as well. So we'll just have to see.
So often people need some sort of authority figure to give them permission to think and to treat a concept more, I guess, fairly and more in a balanced way. And so do you think now that Google have stepped up and said that we're going to do some research into anti-aging, it'll be taken more seriously in other circles as well?
Yes, I think that that's one of the immediate benefits, is that when Google took on Ray Kurzweil as their new director of research, that was the first sign that there was a very public, of course they had been backing Singularity University before that, And if you had been following the speakers that they've been bringing through the Google campus, there had also been a steady stream of transhumanist speakers there.
I have.
But bringing Ray on as director of research or engineering, whatever his title is, has certainly given a pat on the head to us, and people pay attention when big multi-billion-dollar corporations like that give us the veneer of legitimacy for our ideas. So the direction that Calico is going is basically, in broad terms, the same direction as other transhumanist-inspired researchers like Aubrey de Grey have been going, and hopefully that will give a boost to the entire field.
Yeah, my hopes reflect yours, I believe. So, what would a company with $55 billion at their fingertips be able to do for aging?
Well, it depends on how much of it they put into it. I mean, I think Aubrey's always said that it would only take about $1 billion of research to get where he wanted to go. But
yeah, that's right.
who knows?
100 million for 10 years consecutively, right? He says. Yeah.
Yes, exactly. And so if they put anything close to that into the research, hopefully it will yield the kind of dividends that Aubrey guessed at, when no one really knows. Now that I've been in the field of technological futurism for 20 years or so, I'm pretty cautious about all these kinds of projections. I mean, I remember the enthusiasm I had about leptin when it was first discovered that it was one of these key mechanisms in regulating body fat, and I thought, now that we've discovered leptin, there'll be a anti-fat pill in just a couple of years. I won't have to diet anymore. And that was 15 years ago, and there still isn't a fat pill because the mechanisms of leptin turned out to be far too complicated to mess around with that way in human beings. So we'll just have to see how quickly this all progresses. But it certainly bolsters my faith that the lines of technological progress are converging towards solutions to aging and to increase longevity.
Well, I certainly do hope that Google collaborate with the SENS project. Now, Aubrey de Grey mentioned this. I don't think I think they know what he's doing. I think that's obvious. And they're quite aware of his ideas, and they're quite aware of the SENS Foundation. And they're not too far away from them, geographically speaking. So I'm hoping that there's some form of collaboration there.
Yes, I imagine there are a lot of backdoor channels. I mean, the Alliance for Anti-Aging Research now encompasses quite a number of different firms and research efforts. So there's a broad ecology of groups and scientists who are working on different things that they will need to be tapped into. And I expect they will be very sophisticated in the approach that they take and trying to figure out how to support the research.
Are you aware of the Larry Ellison Foundation that did or is still working on aging?
Yeah, I'm not aware of what particular lines that they've been pursuing, but yeah, that I have read about the Ellison Foundation. Yes.
Oh, okay. So yeah, my impression it was more about trying to get something in the short term. I'm not sure how much of, like, a particular part of aging, like maybe cancer research. I'm not sure. I should really do my research before being a pundit and saying anything, but I was just hoping you might have some
Me too.
more information. So yeah, right. Now, well, it's interesting. There has been quite a bit of excitement, but like all scientific endeavors, it's hard to pinpoint when an actual breakthrough has happened, because it's all about increasing likelihoods and testing hypotheses and then getting to a certain level of certainty, and then you can sort of pop out the champagne. But often people don't know when to pop out the champagne. Like, everybody has a different idea about, when is it time to celebrate. On the other hand, we have things like sport, where somebody kicks an inflatable ball between two sticks and people cheer, and countries, do a big Mexican wave and say, hey, wow, that's exciting, But shouldn't people be more interested in science? Like, for instance...
Absolutely. Yeah. I mean, I have promoted for a long time the idea that we need a more technologically informed citizenry, as have many. And ever since the Cold War, the promotion of science and technology has been central focus of a lot of policymakers and influential people. So, but I think that one of the ways in which this would benefit us is that people would have more faith and commitment to the endeavors of science and technology. We have as you know, in the United States, quite a political polarization around issues of science and technology because the right has been overly influenced by, on the one hand, corporations that deny the science of, for instance, climate change and argue that it's all a conspiracy on the part of scientific climate people. And on the other hand, the religious right, who are quite hostile to the secularism of science and to the notion that there's an evolutionary origin to human species. And so there's been such a polarization around it in the United States that it's hard to look past that and to promote just science for its own sake. That's really unfortunate. And we, of course, just today, the federal government has, for all non-essential services, shut down, and a lot of labs are being directly affected by this. The National Institutes of Health. I tried to access some statistics from a federal agency today and got the message that it would be closed until further notice. And so, yeah, the fiscal austerity that's being imposed on us by the conservatives is deeply harming American science.
Right. And do you think that that'll have long-term consequences?
Well, I hope it has long-term consequences for the GOP because the polls showed that 80% of Americans are opposed to this particular gambit on the part of the GOP to shut down the government over their futile fight against the kind of limited extension of health insurance that we've been able to achieve here in the United States. But in the longer term, I don't think it's going to have that much effect on science. I think science will surge ahead. And Ray has done these wonderful charts of different kinds of technological progress over time and shown that the Great Depression and wars and so forth had very little effect on the exponential trends that he'd been tracking. So I'll tip my hat to Ray and say I hope that that's the case and that this temporary shutdown of federal funding dollars won't have any permanent damage.
Yeah, right. So, I mean, Google won't be affected by that, and so their research won't be affected.
Right.
Maybe the the Brain Initiative may be affected, and some of the interesting neuroscience initiatives might be, which is a shame. So, do you think then, at least in the short term, a lot of the scientific research and development will be, I guess, championed by companies, by industry, rather than like a social sort of government thing?
Well, there are certain kinds of research which really are the natural purview of government agencies, basic research. And so that's, again, why it's so exciting to see an institution like Google get into basic research and long-sighted research like anti-aging research. Because it makes a lot more sense for governments to do that than corporations who have to recoup their investment. But I think that there's a natural interplay between corporate and government research. I happen to think that corporations get far better the end of that deal in most industrialized countries because they are able to capitalize on the advances that are made by basic research and then bring those to market. And so I think that there's a strong argument for the public having an invested interest on the basis of the research that's been done and the investment that we've made in scientists through their education to recoup some of the benefits of that research. But that's a bigger argument. But in terms of the innovation, Ron Bailey, who is one of my sparring partners occasionally on these issues of public versus private. He writes for the Reason magazine. He's done some interesting writing on the relative impacts of public investment versus private investment on scientific innovation. His argument is that the relative amount of public investment doesn't really generate that much benefit in terms of scientific innovation. I'm skeptical of the logic that leads him there. But I think there is an interesting debate about whether more innovation comes out of the private sector than the public.
Well, do you think more innovation will come out of the private sector with regards to anti-aging or more transhuman style technologies?
Well, what we've seen for the last, 50, 100 years, medical research or medical products have always promised longevity of one sort or another. So you go back to the 19th century snake oil salesmen, they were promising that you'd have a longer life. And so the problem with the private sector is that it's trying to make a buck, and it doesn't have very much concern for actual evidence. What we need, at least in the industrialized countries, is a very strong regulatory system that ensures that products are safe and effective, so that when you get sold, shark cartilage, that you know that it actually works or doesn't work. That's been very difficult to do in the United States because a lot of the supplement manufacturers have been able to lobby for them to be exempt from Food and Drug Administration guidelines about what kinds of claims they're allowed to make. So I'm pretty skeptical of the private sector's commitment to longevity medicine, I have to say, because the history has not been good. They've been, you look at non-longevity medicine, you look at things like hormone replacement therapy, which was in use for a good 20, 30 years before the research finally showed that it really harmed more women than it helped. You look at Prozac, which there's a long history of studies that had been suppressed by the pharmaceutical manufacturers that showed that SSRIs actually did not help a lot of people, that it was little better than the placebo effect in many of the studies. But we didn't know that because they had suppressed the research. So I think that we at least need a very strong regulatory state to bring all that kind of research into the public domain and judge it on the basis of efficacy and safety. Now, as I said, I also think that there's a strong role and a necessary role for basic research. And to get away from just the anti-aging research, there's many causes of disease and suffering in the world that are underfunded, cholera, typhus, many of the different kinds of diseases that people suffer from in the developing world that are underfunded because the people who suffer from those diseases don't have any money to pay for the medicine. So why would a pharmaceutical company do the research? So, we really need governments and nonprofit organizations to be in that space, funding those kinds of necessary research where there isn't a direct profit motive. I think what Google's signaling is that in the long term they believe there will be a profit motive. I doubt that they would have started Calico if there wasn't, but it's a very long-term and risky endeavor for them, so that's why we're cheering it. But in general, most corporations don't have the billions to risk in this kind of space.
That's true. An interesting example of some of the one technology in general, like nanotechnology, that was funded by the government, but has seemed to be the goal of nanotechnology seems to be sideswiped and turned into material sciences. The original ideas of nanotechnology seem to be more about molecular manufacturing rather than, finessing chemicals together and, the more material sciences approach. So, but that was actually, I'm not sure if it was a direct product of, government funding, or if it was just, a political sort of lobby by Richard Smalley and folk. What does this development say about the possible future of government funding for anti-aging research?
Well, it is an instructive case because the National Nanotechnology Initiative was clearly hijacked by Smalley and the nanomaterials manufacturers who wanted to get the funding for themselves and didn't want to scare the horses by talking about gray goo and all the terrible things that could come out of molecular manufacturing. So there was a politics around that worked against long-term research. On the other hand, the trajectory of nano research has not really changed, and I think that in the long run, the National Nanotechnology Initiative in the United States, the funding that went into nanotechnology from the Clinton administration, really will, in the long term, benefit molecular manufacturing, because all of the modalities of nanomolecular engineering are being developed through nanomaterials. So, for instance, in nanomedicine, there's a lot of progress being made in coating drug delivery vehicles with nanomaterials so that they more effectively target tumors and other purposes in the body, getting past the blood-brain barrier and so forth. That's a step towards the kind of nanomaterial or nanobiological interfaces that we all imagine will eventually come about, having little robots that slip around in our body and do great things. So I don't think that there's that sharp a division anymore between the trajectory from nanomaterials to nanorobotics.
Okay, right. So you don't think that, the divergence away from the ultimate goal of nanotechnology into material sciences has had a really big impact on the timeline of reaching sort of the ultimate goal of nanotechnology, which is molecular manufacturing? That's I always thought it would have, but
Well, if we had set out from the beginning to say, everything should be geared towards building nanorobots, it probably would have come a little faster. But there are a lot of proximate benefits that have come out of nanomaterials research, in medical applications, as I've said, that are of great benefit and support the field in ways that a longer-term, riskier investment in nanorobotics hasn't. So I think it's an evolutionary kind of thing. I mean, we need to understand these nano engineering principles at the materials level as well as at the robotic level.
Well, it seems as though the public needs, in order to support the right politicians, to allow for government funding for R&D research, the public needs to understand the benefits of R&D research, and not just short-term research with short-term technological spin-offs with it'll give them a new pill every 5 years or whatnot that may not do as much, may do something useful, but not ultimately solve the fundamental problems with, for instance, aging. So
I mean, I'm a little skeptical of the necessity of convincing the public, because a lot of the politics around the funding of science at a federal level is beyond the scope of most, public debate. It's a matter. We've had an awful lot of funding go into biomedical research in the last 10, 20 years in the United States.
Mm-hmm.
And yes, it's partly because it's a popular kind of thing to fund compared to space or some of the other ways that we could spend that money. But the actual details of how we spend money on federal science is mostly at a level that only reaches, 10 or 5% of the population's level of threshold of attention. So, that's just one of the funky things about democracies. Not everybody's paying attention to that debate.
Right. So, I mean, well, then how do we increase the likelihood, in whatever way possible, of having more fundamental research done on important avenues in science?
Well, even if it only increased, if we were only able to get 5% of the population of Australia and 5% of Americans enthusiastic about the prospects for anti-aging medicine, we would be able to get the kind of funding that we need to carry out SENS type research or Calico type research with federal dollars. The disease lobbies in Washington, D.C., which are organized by people who are the caregivers and families of folks with Alzheimer's disease or juvenile diabetes or whatever the disease is that they've organized around, they represent a very small fraction of the population, but they're able to lobby quite effectively. You bring in, someone in a wheelchair to a senator's office, and they are able to eventually convince lots of people to give lots of money to those particular causes. We need to have a similar kind of strategy, but since we're all suffering from the disease of aging, it's harder to organize. It's one of these, it's the identity of all of us as victims of the aging plague is not quite as strong as if we had got a diagnosis of Parkinson's disease. So that is part of the challenge of organizing this particular campaign.
Yeah, that does seem quite a challenge, and it's hard to just get somebody old and walk them into like a courtroom and say this person deserves like fundamental anti-aging research. Right. Why aren't you doing it? And then you're looking at the judge, and they're probably older than the person you've got in the witness stand. So
yeah, my brother-in-law is a lobbyist actually, and was a former chief of staff for a senator, and I've argued with him occasionally, to not much avail, that one of the clear things that the Democratic Party, for instance, should get behind is what we have called the longevity dividend. That the way to save the social safety net with this oncoming wave of baby boom retirees in the industrialized world is to figure out longevity treatments that would keep seniors able-bodied and out of nursing homes and able to theoretically work in the workplace. And that just seems like to him and to many people that I've talked to about this idea, it still seems like a pie-in-the-sky idea. We have to make the connection, and I don't know if you've ever read Nick Bostrom's parable of the dragon tyrant.
Yes, I certainly have. Yeah, great.
But that's basically the challenge. At some point, there's going to be a tipping point where people finally realize, hey, we can kill this thing. And once that happens, then there will be a real rush of political support to save the social safety net and have all the other derivative benefits of longevity. But right now, there's still a dominant deathist meme out there that to extend longevity any further would mean living lives that are not worthy of living, and would mean destroying the environment and destroying a future for our children, and all the things, all the tropes that people trot out.
It is interesting. Some people say that if we pursue fundamental research in longevity or anti-aging research, then what we're doing is condemning tomorrow to a world that is I guess plagued with people and therefore not sustainable. But it's interesting that we don't have we don't know what this aging will actually produce, and and if we don't do this research, then we're not giving the future people a choice about what to do with the research, what to do with the flowers of this research. And so what we're really saying is the future generations should not live any longer than we do. Right?
That's right.
Which is a bit unfair. Let's just say there is.
It's especially unfair since we lived twice as long as our ancestors did. So
yeah, that's right.
We should at least pass along the gift.
Yeah, that's correct. And so, look, let's just say we do have this research flower and we do live for longer. Is it likely that anti-aging will be the only technology that increases in efficacy over time, and we won't have any other solutions to environmental problems? Do you think lifespan will be...
Thanks for the softball question. It's obvious where you need to go with that one. Well, yeah, you're absolutely right. I mean, that if you look, I'm actually going Sunday in a couple of days. I'm going down to the New York Medical College to talk to students about the film Gattaca. They invited me down to address this film.
Nice film.
And this is one of my favorite examples of this particular limitation on the popular imagination. It's like in the film Gattaca, they live in a future in which children can be selected for health and longevity prenatally, genetically engineered for it apparently. And then this poor guy, his parents decide not to give him to fix his broken, genetically broken heart. And he wants to become an astronaut, and he can't and everything. But the problem with the film, the first problem is takes place in what, like a 50 or 100 years from now, and you have all this genetic technology, but you don't have stem cells or gene therapies or nanobots or anything that could fix the guy's frickin' heart, right? And he's the only recourse that he has is to buy blood samples from this other guy to pretend that he actually is an able-bodied person so that he can become an astronaut. Of course, the other problem with Gattaca is that he basically commits fraud so that he can get into the space program and die in space with other astronauts, which if anyone tried in an actual space program, no one would celebrate as a heroic gesture. But at any rate, one of the many popular fictions that illustrate the problem. But it's very difficult for speculative fiction and for our imaginations in general to extrapolate not only that we'll have this technology in the future, but we'll also have this one, and this one, and those technologies all together might create new problems or they might create new solutions. So this has been the Malthusian. The reason that we keep outgrowing the Malthusian projections is that our agricultural productivity and our other forms of productivity have continued, well apace with our population growth. And now what most people in the world appear to be unaware of is that population is slowing down, and that the major problem that the industrialized world faces, and China increasingly, and Japan and other countries, is not population growth, but population crash, because they're not going to have enough young people to support their senior citizens. And every single year, the UN Population Agency and the U.S. population projectors, they have to ratchet down their expectations of how many people there are going to be in the future because our fertility rate keeps declining. If you look at the UN Population Agency, their projections out 50, 80 years, however long they project it out, they they show these trends of what's happened in terms of the crashing of population around the world, and then they all bring the line back up to 2.0 because it's impossible for them to wrap their mind around, or at least politically impossible for them to suggest that the world population would actually start to shrink. So they think everybody around the world is eventually going to start having 2 children per couple again, and we'll get back to population stability. But that's not the direction that things are headed. We're headed towards population crash on a worldwide basis. And the longer that people live, the less incentive they have for fertility, because shorter life expectancies are directly correlated with larger, litters of children, basically. What we need to do is start to think about what's it going to look like if we do have this radical longevity, in which we have a different population pyramid, in which we have a gradually extending top of the population pyramid and a shrinking bottom of the population pyramid. One of the things that we have to wrap our mind around is that we're going to have to get rid of retirement. But on the other hand, we're also going to be, another one of the technological challenges we face is that we're going to be having fewer and fewer jobs as a result of technological unemployment. So everything's in flux, and but it's very difficult for people to keep all those variables in their mind.
It certainly is, and we're hoping technology will be able to help with that. But I guess if people had a longer life, a radically, or at least a view of a radically longer life, would their views change about the future of the biosphere, for instance, or what the future would be for not just them, not just their children, but themselves? Attitudes might change.
I think to me, that's self-evident, that if you're going to be around if you think you're going to be around, you believe you're going to be around for 100, 200, 300 years, that you would care a lot more about not only climate change, but you care a lot more about, asteroid deflection and some of the longer term risks that people think, well, the likelihood of me being whacked by an asteroid in the next 30 years of my life is minuscule, so who cares? But if you really think you might be, then you might invest in that a little bit. Now, Bruce Sterling's novel Holy Fire, he is one of the authors who's looked at what the risk psychology effect of longevity might be, and he proposes in there that a society dominated by older people would become quite risk averse. I think that there is some logic to that. I think the longer it's self-evident that when we look at societies in Africa and places with very short life expectancies, they take more risks and make fewer long-term investments and so forth than those that have longer life expectancies, and that's part of the risk psychology of human beings. But on the other hand, this is where the anti-aging modalities come in, because I think one of the things that's going to happen, and which he also projects in the novel Holy Fire, is that we're going to be able to basically reboot neuroplasticity. That it's hard to imagine having radically extended longevity unless we had a greater neuroplasticity. If we just had the same level of memory and learning capacity, and it just declined over time, even as our bodies stayed healthy, then that would be, kind of the Typhonist problem. We would eventually be senile people in young bodies. So we want to have young brains that are constantly capable of learning and regenerating. And that means a society that probably will have a younger approach to risk and not be as risk averse as the skeptics worry about.
Interesting. So, yeah, right. Do you find that there's much, do you think there's much opposition in the skeptics community with regard to, like, radical technologies like longevity and the higher forms of nanotechnology and things like that? And is this an issue? Is this a problem?
Skepticism among who?
Well, the skeptics community with the K, right?
You mean like the free thinkers, the rationalists, people like that?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I mean, there's some people in that community. I mean, most of those people tend to be techno enthusiasts like us, but when they look at transhumanism, they see a kind of quasi-religious faith in the future of technological possibility, and they're not entirely wrong about that. So, I understand why some of our techno enthusiasms are interpreted as irrational. I'm a sociologist, so whenever I talk to scientists, I always, preface what I say. Look, my technological predictions are completely unscientifically informed from your perspective, but I think that you as a scientist have a certain amount of techno-skepticism because you've been plodding along in a linear fashion in your lab, and you don't get rewarded for looking at the big picture. You don't get rewarded for talking about long-term historical trends. So there's a way in which an informed lay observer of science like myself might have a different and possibly more accurate interpretation of the possibilities of the future of science than the scientists themselves in plodding along in a defeated way, seeing the constant failure of their own initiatives, but not looking at the broader trajectory.
That's an interesting phenomenon. So, but I mean, like, in terms of like the lay interested person, the community of enthusiasts, what can we do to increase the likelihood of having technologies like basic research into the required research into the technology you want to see fruit? What can we do? Is there any call to action that we can sort of rally around?
Well, we can certainly support the nonprofit organizations that have been organized, like SENS, to promote this kind of research. The Alliance for Aging Research in the United States. There are several other nonprofit organizations working in this field. So sorry about that. that's certainly one of the things that we can do. But we can also begin to raise the issue politically. As I said, one of the challenges ahead is trying to figure out how to have a political movement around a longevity dividend argument around the benefits of anti-aging research, comparable to the kinds of organizations that have been so effective around AIDS and Alzheimer's research and Parkinson's and so forth. So engaging in that kind of political activism, although there's no immediate vehicle at hand, but we need to be looking for how to do that in the future.
Sure. Okay. Well, there's been a number of Change Surfer Radio podcasts that have sort of converged on the theme of anti-aging in the past. It would be good to get some links to some of those that I can pass on. Is there any particular episodes which you think would be a good follow-on from this interview?
Well, you can look it up in our search engine at the IET.org, but I have to confess, Adam, that you and many other people have convinced me that video is the future. So Change Surfer, I will acknowledge here that Change Surfer has been in hiatus for about a year and a half now, and I've been trying to gear up to do what you do, which is to very effectively do video interviewing and recording and promotion. So
Sure.
Google what I've done in the past, and hopefully I'll be producing some things along these themes in a video format in the future.
Very much looking forward to that, and it's been great doing an interview with you, and thanks so much for sharing your opinions on Google's initiative and what we can do to increase the likelihood of getting the technologies like anti-aging technologies that we want. Is there any concluding remarks you'd like to add?
Well, just happy Longevity Day.
Yeah.
I'm glad we're a little bit late, but better late than never.
Sure. All right. Many thanks, and I'll just
Okay.
sign out. Thanks, viewers, for watching.